Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here with us today. We're going to take a structured, incredibly visual deep dive into a really foundational piece of medical literature. We're mapping out Chapter 9 from Dr. Harsh Mohan's widely acclaimed 7th edition of the Textbook of Pathology. Now, we aren't just going to look at where these categories live in the book, we're going to learn exactly what these major disease categories actually mean in the real world. If you've ever stared at a dense medical textbook and just felt totally overwhelmed by the sheer volume of categories, trust me, you are in the exact right place. We're going to break down the complex structure of genetic and pediatric diseases together and translate the author's precise taxonomy into a format that's incredibly clear and easy to grasp. Think of me as your personal cartographer today. We're taking a mapped-out journey through the foundational landscape of genetic and pediatric pathology, specifically navigating from pages 251 to 259. By treating the layout of this text like a literal map, we can clearly see the destination the author is guiding us toward. It's really all about the architecture of information. And, once you see how these pathologies are fundamentally organized, you're honestly never going to look at this complex medical terrain the same way again. So here's our clinical roadmap for this explainer. We'll start by mapping Pathology Chapter 9 overall, then we'll dive into structural genetic abnormalities, followed by inheritance and metabolic errors, and finally wrap things up with childhood and infancy tumors. Let's get right into it. Kicking off Section 1, Mapping Pathology Chapter 9. Right out of the gate, notice this clear dichotomy Dr. Mohan uses to split the chapter into two major clinical continents. Over on one side, we've got genetic diseases, starting on page 251, which really commands the bulk of the chapter. And then, starting on page 258, we have other pediatric diseases. This comparison is absolutely crucial because it shows us exactly how medical science separates the conditions you're fundamentally born with, the ones rooted deep in your DNA, from other childhood diseases that are acquired or develop entirely independently of direct genetic inheritance. It's like genetic issues get their own massive, distinct foundation before we even touch upon anything else. Moving right along to Section 2, Structural Genetic Abnormalities. Here, Dr. Mohan maps out 5 core terrains of genetic diseases. Let's quickly define exactly what we're dealing with. First up, we have developmental defects, which are those broader structural issues in organs or limbs. Second are cytogenetic abnormalities, where entire chromosomes might be missing or duplicated. Third, single gene defects. This is where just one tiny mutation causes the whole issue. Fourth is multifactorial inheritance, basically a really complex mix of genetics and environment. And finally, storage diseases, where cells essentially fail to clear out their own waste. By laying these out sequentially, the textbook is giving us a comprehensive, rapid-fire framework for diagnosis. Now, if we follow the literal page-by-page progression of the textbook, you can see exactly how this structural foundation is laid out. We start on page 251 with broad developmental defects. Then on 252, we narrow our focus down to the chromosomal level with cytogenetic abnormalities. And finally, by page 254, we zoom in even further to single gene defects. This isn't just some arbitrary list, right? It's literally a zoom lens approach to the human body. The author starts at the macro level with entire limbs or organs, zooms in to look at whole bundles of chromosomes under a microscope, and then zooms all the way down to microscopic individual strands of DNA. What's really brilliant here is how the author ensures absolute clarity in terminology. Dr. Mohan provides this built-in parenthetical translation right in the heading for cytogenetic abnormalities, clarifying that these issues are fundamentally karyotypic in nature. Now, karyotypic simply means looking at the physical visual map of someone's chromosomes under a microscope so you can spot those missing or extra pieces, kind of like what we see in Down syndrome. If you're a medical student frantically scanning the index, this immediate association anchors the concept instantly. You don't have to guess what cytogenetic implies, because it's linked directly to that visual chromosome map. Which brings us to Section 3, Inheritance and Metabolic Errors. And honestly, this perfectly illustrates that same parenthetical learning hack we literally just talked about. When introducing single gene defects, the textbook equates them directly with Mendelian disorders. This is great because it immediately activates your foundational knowledge from middle school biology. Mendelian refers to those classic dominant and recessive traits passed directly from parents to offspring on one single specific gene. It takes a highly clinical, dense, pathological category and instantly grounds it in a familiar, totally accessible scientific framework. Now, page 256 is a crucial turning point. Following those Mendelian disorders, we arrive at multifactorial inheritance. We're stepping away from the straightforward single-gene dominant or recessive pathways here, and we're entering the territory of diseases influenced by multiple, highly complex pathways. In a clinical setting, multifactorial means a condition isn't just one broken gene. It's this intricate combination of a genetic predisposition interacting heavily with environmental triggers. It really represents the reality that a lot of human diseases are the result of a whole chorus of factors rather than just a single voice. To unlock the final genetic category, we look at storage diseases. And again, Dr. Molhan provides this amazing conceptual translation right there in the text, inborn errors of metabolism. This is just incredible for a focused learner. Think about it. The term storage disease describes the effect, right? Stuff literally accumulating and clogging up the cells. But inborn errors of metabolism describes the underlying cause, a fundamental genetic failure of the body's chemistry. For example, if a baby's body lacks the specific enzyme to break down a certain fat or sugar, that substance just stores up in the cells and causes damage. Having both the cause and the effect linked together like this gives you a completely holistic picture of the pathology.
All right, on to our final section, Section 4, Childhood and Infancy Tumors.
Arriving at page 258, we officially leave the strictly defined genetic diseases behind us. The textbook broadens its scope here to other pediatric diseases. This is a really vital structural pivot. It serves as a reminder that while genetics form a massive, undeniable part of pediatric pathology, there is an entirely separate category of diseases that children face which absolutely require their own dedicated clinical focus. Under this new umbrella on page 259, we find tumors of infancy and childhood. Now, the author specifically isolates these tumors from adult pathologies, and there's a really fascinating reason why. You see, childhood tumors often stem from early developmental anomalies and rapidly growing tissues. This is vastly different from adult tumors, which mostly result from decades of environmental damage, lifestyle factors, or just cellular aging. Highlighting these as a unique and vital area of study within pediatric pathology adds incredible value. It shows us exactly why a pediatric oncologist needs a fundamentally different textbook than an adult oncologist. So, let's see how this builds our final, complete picture. We've got a 2-column breakdown here that summarizes the entire taxonomy we just traveled through. Over on one side, that deep dive into genetic diseases, from broad developmental issues all the way down to specific metabolic failures. And on the other pediatric domain, focusing heavily on childhood tumors. Structuring knowledge exactly like this is how doctors actually narrow down a diagnosis in the real world. It turns a massive, intimidating textbook into a practical, rapid-fire mental triage tool. When presented with a sick child, a clinician can logically move right down these exact pathways to pinpoint the underlying pathology.
So now that you possess the map to Chapter 9 of the textbook of pathology, the rest of the journey is really up to you. From karyotypic abnormalities to inborn errors of metabolism, the entire landscape is laid out before us. When you look at this map, do you just see a list of diseases, or do you see the incredible, complex architecture of human biology? Which of these pathological pathways are you going to explore first? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep structuring your knowledge, and I'll catch you next time.